Good afternoon, everyone. This is a re-record of a presentation given to a meeting on the 12th of March in Dublin City Council chambers. It's the foundation meeting for the EU Ireland Policy Network. And the objective of this project is to bridge the gap that exists between Ireland and the EU and to create a greater understanding of the multi-year financial framework, which is the EU's budget, which is a 7-year budget process, and that will be negotiated over a number of months and years. And that will be a key point of the Irish presidency of the EU that will happen at the second half of 2026. So we decided to re-record the presentation because initially there were problems with the sound and with the recording as well. That original recording, the fragments of it that exist, will be posted there, including key interventions from people who are part of this group as well. So we look forward to sharing this with you. My name is Philippe Carr. I previously worked for the European Commission, and I previously worked for the WWF and the environmental group that lobbies at a European basis on a host of different issues. During the time I was with the WWF, I was a communications advisor on the EU budget, specializing on the Common Agricultural Policy and also structural funding and how that impacted on the environment. Subsequent to that, I went on to work for the humanitarian group MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, and I worked for the UNFPA, which is a UN agency that looks after a number of gender-related issues and the needs of women and girls as well in humanitarian situations. So I've convened this group. There are 35 people who attended the initial meeting on the 12th of March. And we wanted to just present with you the main findings of this presentation, but also some of the discussion points. And hopefully we'll continue this process over the next few months, the next 14 months. That will be the preparation phase for the Irish presidency. So I'll move on with the presentation now and to the next point. So on the day anyway, we had a quick introduction from Councillor Michael Pigeon, who made the Dublin City Council chambers open to us, who's a key sponsor of this event. We then had an introduction, which I'll get to as well. We were moderated by Sive O'Neill, an environmental activist who's very active in Ireland and internationally. I'll give a quick recapping exactly of what we're trying to achieve. On the day, we had Simon Murtaugh from DOCUS, policy officer there, giving the humanitarian perspective and how it affects Ireland. And also Carl Richter, who is WWF's European policy officer relating to the EU budget, who was taking over part of my previous role as well, but he's more working in the advocacy area and working with institutions with regards to the new discussion. We then have Steve Gilman, who is an Irish journalist who worked for 9 years in Brussels. He gave his overall input on the overall reform process. We had an open floor session. And then we had a quick brainstorm on how we can bring forward this project that we're working on. So the whole purpose of today, really, or the whole purpose of the project was to raise the flag. So you can see in the image here, there's a gentleman here raising a blue flag on an Irish beach. This was really, for us, is to start the whole process of civic engagement with regards to the EU 7-year budget, but also use the opportunity, for instance, of the Irish presidency to really enshrine the fact that Irish organisations have a key moment to impact the negotiation of this EU budget, which is worth over 1.2 trillion euros over an estimated 7 years. There are key reforms that are happening that people should be aware of. Unfortunately, a lot of Irish organisations, both in the environmental and the humanitarian and social justice area, unfortunately don't have the capacity to work on this just yet. But with all things EU related, preparation is key. So our hope with this network is to help share some of that key information and help explain a little bit more about what's going on with regards to the EU process, and at some stage allow other organisations then take over that process as well. So the overall idea is not to take over from other organisations that are doing a great job, either the Irish Environmental Network or DOCUS or even the IIEA. We're a network, I suppose, of interested parties based in Ireland and in Brussels who would like to work together and see how we can actually frame some of these issues, provide information both to other organizations, but also to the general public as well. So you can see that the 35 people here that were here today span a lot of different disciplines. Some of them are politicians, some of them are policy experts, some of them are campaigners, some of them are legal experts, but they've all got something to contribute towards this process. And I suppose taking a little bit of Irish ownership over a process that's very much usually elite driven. So what we're trying to do is make this more accessible, both to Irish-based organizations, but also to Irish citizens as well, eventually as well, so they can play a part and help frame how this new reform is happening. So I suppose what we're trying to do is create a space for genuine dialogue as well. The EU does create spaces. There's a little example here on the right-hand side of a slide of our new commissioner, Michael McGrath, who's doing admirable work in Brussels anyway with regards to democratic empowerment. But it's really kind of creating all sides of the house as well. And what we're trying to do today is create a network. We're not an advocacy group, we're not a policy group. We're trying to explain some of the key parts of what are a negotiation process, a discussion process as well, that some people may not be aware of. What we want this to be overall is to be a respectful and safe space as well for discussion. So, it's an opportunity to exchange ideas. And we really don't want any abuse or disrespect, I suppose, with regards to the discussion. Everyone is giving their time and resources voluntarily. They're coming, I suppose, as individuals rather than representing any organization. And what we'd really like to do is create that as an opportunity for continued information. And that will lead to greater information sharing as well. So ideas, information, there's no such thing as a stupid question, but there's also no such thing as a stupid solution as well. We can work all this out together as well. So, when we exchange information in this network, the vetting process is self-selective. People can join the network. We'll allow people into the network. It's not there. There's no application fee, whatever. But process is quite light. So anyone within this whole network, information needs to be shared freely. There's no hidden rooms of what's going on. There's no smoke-filled rooms. This is really everyone coming up front, presenting who they are and showing very much that their voluntary participation is very much a personal capacity. So it's not an endorsement from any organization because someone is there speaking on behalf. Sive, for instance, is a part of the Labour Party, but she's also an activist. You'll get to meet Sive in a second. Carl, for instance, from WWF is one of the speakers. He's doing that from a personal capacity as well. We have other speakers there speaking from their past information and their past experience, So I have worked for the European Commission, but I don't speak for the European Commission in any way at the moment. All I can give is an insight on how they were thinking at the time that I worked there. And from this network, people are free to form their own separate groups and do what they want with the information. Members are welcome to break off, form their new groups, apply for funding individually or apply when we signpost it, or work on separate initiatives. Overall competition is good because it allows the free movement of ideas. But we also hope that it's going to be a respectful area as well. So moving on as well, the online guide that we had on the day, it's a recorded session. It's full transparency. Unfortunately, we did have a few technical hiccups on the day, but we've been moving quite quickly with this group, and we're learning as we go along. So we've asked everyone to introduce themselves in the group. The whole attendance list will be known. We've asked for that respectful ethos to continue, and then there were a few more kind of housekeeping rules. We were also moderated on the day online as well, so there was contributions coming in from a lot of different areas. What we've asked for people to do is to join the network, but to provide their name, their email, their LinkedIn profile. And if you join the overall network, you'll be asked to submit those details and what level of information you'd like, but also what level of information you'd like to submit to. And, we're encouraging people to feel free to drop in relevant resources and links to key information that they think is relevant. This could be access to funding. This could be information about the MFF process or the Irish presidency, or it could also just be about how their own organization is faring in these uncertain times. So we've all seen what's happening in America with the funding cuts. That's going to be replicated, unfortunately, throughout Europe. It's going to have a ripple effect on funding and humanitarian funding and environmental funding. And this is our attempt to at least address the information imbalance that exists in this overall process. So again, anyway, we'll give a quick impact on the state of play. So we're all acutely aware of the world's uncertainty at the moment. And the EU is playing a positive role regarding environment, humanitarian intervention, protection of rights, things like that. Could it do a little bit better? Yes, it could, but it's an important source of funding. And in the past, it was a source of funding when few national governments had resources. So even back before the Celtic Tiger, EU funding was quite important for Irish national policy, both in the environmental and the humanitarian area as well. It would do the things sometimes the Irish government didn't or couldn't fund, didn't do. And it could act as a force multiplier when it comes to aid. So the EU budget itself, it's to recap. It's not a 1 year process that you might have in national budgetary situations. It's a 7 year process. And the negotiations happen over that 7 year process. So we'll explain a little bit more about that anyway. But really, there's an opportunity for Irish civil society to engage with the presidency, engage with the Irish government. We're lucky enough to have an Irish government that's quite close to us, that you can get meetings with councillors, TDs, ministers, even if you do it in the right approach. And overall, that we think, working within a partnership approach with regards to the EU and other international partners can yield benefits. So there's a time for being on the streets. There's a time for constructive engagement. This network can signpost both, but it's really an approach that will lend itself, I suppose, to a little bit more understanding about the process and respect for those institutions and the work that those individuals within those organizations are doing. So ideologically, we may differ with them, but there is a commitment from a lot of organizations to really do that. And in the European institutions, generally, there's an overall ethos of wanting to encourage civic participation in process making. They're not always the best at communicating that need, but there are different pressure points and there are different opportunities and invitations that extend themselves at different times. And organizations should really take to doing that. So what are we trying to do? The reality is we're trying to build a bridge. There's the beautiful Halfpenny Bridge in Dublin, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a bridge between Europe and Brussels. So at Brussels level, a lot of NGOs and a lot of networks are working vigorously with regards to EU policy. But unfortunately, at an Irish level, that's not always happening. In the development and humanitarian sector, it's a little bit more structured. In the environmental area, unfortunately, it's not. But what is important is the amount of money that goes towards supporting the humanitarian sector and the environment. And while the capacity may not exist for Irish NGOs to work on it, there is an overall capacity to access some of that funding for the projects that we work on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis. And the Irish EU presidency, which is happening next year and it's currently being prepared by Irish civil servants, is an opportunity for engagement. Those different opportunities will be signposted over the next number of years, or next number of months, excuse me. But we'll be able to do that. And uniquely, what we're able to do in Ireland with our more accessible political system. And some people will criticize it, and some people will say it's actually a good thing, that we do have, for instance, the opportunity to meet our politicians on a day-to-day basis. But it's probably the most accessible system in Europe, bar maybe Malta or a few other kind of countries as well. You'll see a local politician at a funeral, you'll see them down in your local pub or cafe getting a coffee. If you know who they are, they'll probably be up for a short chat. If you structure your dialogue in the right way, they might be up for a second chat and they may introduce you to a decision maker. So we're kind of relying on that kind of system of opportunity to do that. They don't have that in Germany or France or Italy. So we're very much privileged to do that. And during the Irish presidency, this is an opportunity really to frame that opportunity and that potential. Irish NGOs, unfortunately, have a very limited capacity to generate policy, despite, especially at EU level, despite 30 or 40% of legislation coming from the European Commission, European Parliament, and European Council as well. And there is funding available. It's just sometimes hard to access or know that it's actually happening. You do need to prepare. There's a lot of paperwork, but there's an opportunity to kind of help with regards to that overall process. The EU NGOs like WWF or the Green 10 that existed, which is part of its alliance, or indeed Concord and the humanitarian area, generate a lot of policy. But very often they overlook Ireland. When I worked for WWF, unfortunately, Ireland was not a member. So there was no case studies coming from organic Irish farming or from green tech industries that were factored into those kind of discussions. So there was this kind of imbalance. And that's where we kind of really saw the need to build this bridge between the EU and Brussels. Also, culturally, Ireland is the only English-speaking country in the EU. And that means that whatever goes on Irish websites or is being debated on the Irish media actually makes it across Europe. English is the most accessible language. And since Brexit, we're the only country really with regards to that kind of cultural cachet or soft influence that's kind of important as well. So within the network that we're trying to build, this bridge, there's a lot of latent experience from previous Irish presidencies. There's people who's worked on them in the past. There are people, for instance, who have worked on MFF negotiations. We have two former MEPs who are providing information and advice. There's a specialization in environmental policy, and there's a broad network of people who are all busy in their day-to-day lives, but they're willing to give a little bit of their time and experience at this stage and provide it around a whole kind of wider network for everyone else to take advantage of and to learn from. So a little bit of an overview of the MFF, and this was a presentation. This was kind of put together by myself and Steve Gilman, who I introduced previously as well. Overall, on a year-to-year basis, the total amount, and this depends on inflation. It can change for a little bit, but in the EU budget in 2024, there's 189 billion spent in commitments, and there was a further, payments of 142 billion. So there's a lot of money that has been spent on the European basis. That's money that's allocated at member state level to the budget, but there's other particular ways of raising money as well. Overall, so on the overall 7-year basis, you can look at how it's split currently. So the 2021 to 2027 period, which we're currently sitting in, and just had its midterm review, had 149 billion going for the single market, innovation and digital kind of issues. Another 426 billion was being spent on cohesion, resilience and values. Natural resources and environment accounted for 401 billion. Migration and border management was 28.2 billion. Security and defense, 16.4 billion. And obviously that's a growing priority with what's happening in Ukraine and Eastern Europe. And then building, I suppose, the neighborhood and the rest of the world. This is humanitarian aid, but also it's development assisted and structural funding and other types of funding in Eastern Europe. So Africa, Asia, South America, other parts of the world. They're all key. They're all happening there. And then I suppose to run the whole system, 82.5 billion euros is spent over that 7-year basis to kind of run the European Parliament, the European Commission, all the different offices, pay for the salaries of people, all those types of things as well. So it's quite a considerable amount of money that's spent. And there's very little public scrutiny, I suppose, over it. The Commission does audit its accounts. The last number of years, those audits came back and they weren't approved, but it continues on anyway. And I suppose the EU is overspending at the moment. So since COVID, there was a big next generation EU fund that was used, and countries like Germany, really want to get reform. So that extra tranche of funding came through different bond structures or loan structures that exist that will be explained at a later stage. But countries like Germany want to see change. And I suppose for countries like Ireland or France or other countries like that, that change will see differences in how the money is allocated. So at the moment, anyway, we're looking at examples of external action between 2021. Simon Murtaugh from DOCUS presented this, and you'll be able to access this at a later stage, his full presentation. But he kind of gave it an overview, of how much money is being spent annually. So again, the figures differ a little bit from the previous slide. That's to do with inflation and exactly when the funding was captured. But there's money that goes into the ECHO fund, the European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations, which is about 1.65 billion annually, or 11.57 over a 7-year basis. That's a key area which organizations from the UN to our own organizations like Goal and Trócaire are able to dip into and support partnerships with places like Africa in humanitarian, but also, I suppose, in development funding as well. So there's a little bit of a difference there. And I suppose integrating that into environmental spend as well, that's sustainable funding. You've also got, for instance, the Neighbourhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument, or Global Europe, which is another fund as well, which is an additional 79 billion. And that goes into EU's external action, which includes its diplomacy, funding for geographical and thematic programs, which include areas around climate change, biodiversity preservation, things like that as well. But that's really Europe's international budget as well. You've also then got which might be a little bit obscured, but you've also got examples of environmental funding as well. So these are just three different funds that we picked out. It's not everything. You have research and innovation funding, the Horizon Europe, which funds some areas around food farming, rural development, and bioeconomy. Supports sustainable agricultural practices and innovation, some areas there. You have agri-environment, which some of us are more aware of, measures in the CAP. The CAP is the biggest part of the current EU budget and accounts for 387 billion over that process. And at least 25% of direct payments budget supports environmental friendly practices. So it's a very, very considerable area. And then 40% of that cap itself has to be dedicated to climate relevant activities as well. So it can support farming, but it also has to kind of take on board the needs of that area as well. There's also issues around climate, biodiversity, and other water quality and things like that as well. Then there's particular life funding, which has been key for key projects around the country. I myself helped support something called Burn Life in the past, which is an amazing farming biodiversity project based in Burn. I also worked, when I worked with WWF, on a sustainable foods diet initiative as well called Live Well for Life. And that was funded through the Life program, sorry. And it's really a key area for our people to tap into. Unfortunately, all those areas are under threat at the moment from this new budget reform. So just kicking on, and again, we have slight difference, I suppose, in towards how that money is being evaluated. It's a long-term budgetary process. There's in this slide here, it says 2.8 billion, but you can also say 1.2 billion if it's pre-2021, pre-inflation. It's a lot of money, whatever the figure is anyway. And there was an extra 807 billion in temporary recovery instrument. That's the Next Generation EU that was actually provided. So that was through bonds, that was through loans, that was through different kind of financial instruments that unfortunately is probably a little bit beyond my understanding when it comes to it as well. But it is basically leveraging, I suppose, the EU's budget as a loan instrument as well, and using that to generate growth, inflation, development, but also that assistance for key projects and programs. It's pretty clear that the EU now has a different priority agenda. The 2028 to 2034 MFF is set to focus more on security, defense, and maintaining EU's competitiveness. And this presentation or network isn't a judgment of whether that's necessary or not. There's a need to respond to Ukraine. There's a need to respond to those core elements, but it can't come at the cost of the environment and humanitarian assistance. I think there's a general kind of awareness there, but also the social justice element. That's a key part of Europe and making Europe work for its own citizens as well. So the original fund, anyway, the recovery to competitiveness was there. It was a really important thing to get us out of COVID and to get the European economy kickstarted. But also it was the Green Deal, and having that move to more security kind of led kind of approach is not a positive thing. There's different views on how security should be paid for. That's not within the framework of this network. It's discussing those points. It's giving more strategic autonomy to member states to decide how they spend the money, which contravenes some of the interests, I suppose, with regards to the EU. So big funding groups like structural funding or Erasmus and Erasmus Plus were all about Europe's collective budgets being used to break down borders and increase cooperation between different economies and different societies. By giving more autonomy at a member state level, okay, there are some benefits to that, but it also means that some of these big items, such as infrastructural kind of investment that happen with structural funding, may suffer. And that's part to be decided with regards to the whole negotiation process. So we're looking, I suppose, from national contributions to looking at EU revenue sources. There's even talk of a digital tax, for instance. There's lots of different ways, but the EU is looking for new revenue streams. Countries like Germany are looking to spread the burden, and they're also looking for their diversification and more value, I suppose, from the EU budget. So the first pillar of what we're talking about is, is a member state focus. So this would be where the common agricultural policy resides. This would be where, currently the structural funding resides. Rather than being spread across the EU budget or across the whole EU, it would, I suppose, account for about 70% of the EU public spending. And this first pillar of the three-pillar new structure that's been proposed by the European Commission, we'll look at energy, we'll look at digital, we'll look at supporting a lot of different areas that are aligned with common EU policies. So it's a major change. It will have impact on farming. It will have impact on a lot of different areas and needs to be understood a little bit more. Next to the second pillar, which is really focusing on competitiveness. A European Competitiveness Fund will be created under the European Commission's vision. It would enhance access to financing for SMEs and startups, leverage existing tools like InvestEU. This responds to challenges of the green economy, global competition, private sector, funding gaps. But there is a very much a pro-business, I suppose, approach, which might well be needed, but it can't again come at the expense of core funding for the environment and other core areas around social justice and the needs of society. And finally, the third pillar, which is rationalized external action. A streamlined external action mechanism focused on Europe's strategic interests, including enlargement, neighbourhood policy, migration, resilience to external shocks, and is inspired by Team Europe approach. It would coordinate the EU's institutions, its member states, and financial institutions. It would take on board different banking systems that are created, like the European Investment Bank, to ensure a unified response to global challenges, security, climate, humanitarian crisis, etc. But the focus very much is on European interests and not on the partnership with, for instance, developing countries that really do need a more level-based approach to working together. So, development aid doesn't work if it's top down. It needs to be a real partnership of people working together, of governments working together, of NGOs working together. And if it's really kind of a Brussels-led approach towards funding, that kind of contravenes the original principle on which a lot of this external finance kind of happens. So I suppose one of the key challenges overall, and we touched on this, is the squeeze that's happening overall with regards to EU policy and aid. There will be a reduction in international aid, humanitarian development focus. That's nearly given. There will be end of key programming like LIFE and reduction in agri-environment schemes. Already actively in the European Parliament, there's a strong lobby to cancel LIFE completely by various far-right groups and people who don't value, I suppose, the impact that LIFE has had. There'll be a reallocation towards defence, competitiveness and technology, which is important, but it's also can't, as we said, kind of come at the expense of other things as well. And a move away from EU infrastructural support to EU funding for Ukraine defence and EU capacities as well. So that's doubling up in the last point a little bit as well. But there is a far-right agenda overall contaminating this discourse around, I suppose, the areas around humanitarian development, sustainable development, the needs of the environment, climate change, and social justice elements as well. And this needs to be in some way kind of recognized that there is this kind of opposition, which is contaminating the discussion around kind of having a credible need, but also the dialogue at a national level and a Brussels level. And this is really our approach to kind of address that. So the negotiation process for the MFF, the EU budget, over the next number of years, it started already. There will be greater fiscal scrutiny of the next MFF and heightened security concerns and increasing calls for strategic autonomy. Policymakers must navigate competing priorities while ensuring that the budget remains an effective tool for EU resilience. Over the course of the 2025-2026, there are several MFF levels that policy negotiators will kind of do and will go through. And, at the level one area, priorities and total budget available, there'll be an acknowledgement and a view kind of like what there is there. At a secondary level, level two, different budgets and headings and their envelopes, there'll be more discussion, I suppose, at a kind of a more micro level, I suppose, of what's going on. There'll be an external budget heading in development and foreign policy. There'll be discussions on that pillar there. And then the level four, governance of external financing instruments. So how that's allocated, how funding is given, I suppose, to different organizations, to different governments, to partners, but also how it's scrutinized as well. And all of these things are needed, but it's kind of a part of an overall kind of process. And the European Commission, their draft opinion has already been leaked. It was leaked in December. But there will be a overall, I suppose, official consultation process that's starting quite soon, that will lead to June, when we expect the official European Commission's recommendation, which will have this three-pillar process, will be launched effectively by the European Commission President. So with all of these things, there is an engagement process, but you need to get in early to take advantage of all these opportunities. The Irish presidency, it happens in this process, and Irish presidencies have been really important kind of network. But maybe not as important since the Lisbon Treaty was passed, when the Irish government had pretty much full ownership of framing the agenda. This slide here kind of shows some of the different things that were accomplished during the Irish presidencies in the past. So one of the first presidencies that we had back in the early days helped forge 23 billion pounds worth of development aid. The first presidency, was around EU unification, and the Irish had a special role in kind of making sure that the overall embrace of the new reality post-communism was kind of appreciated, and that new countries were starting to be welcomed into this, but also that Germany was there as well, and it was obviously around a time as well where the Balkans were starting to flare up as well as Yugoslavia deconstructed. During Ireland's fifth presidency, it was used really to kind of focus on single issues. One issue that I just wanted to pull out of here was, for instance, changing the whole policy around East Timor, which had been occupied by Indonesia. Major human rights concerns were happening there. A genocide was unfolding over a 20-year period. And the Irish government used that to draw focus on the issue, to leverage the EU's diplomacy, I suppose, with regards to that, to change US and Australian policy, which had been supporting the Indonesian government's occupation. And it was a real kind of opportunity there. The last presidency that we had was 2004, where a number of other great things were happening, and we won't go into that just right now, but there was an opportunity, I suppose, really for greater kind of scrutiny as well there. This is an opportunity for Ireland to offer leadership in humanitarian and environmental policy, and we do have a number of civil society organizations from the Irish Civil Service, the different ministries and departments, organizations like the IAEA, which help shape the agenda, and need to get, but there really is a recognition that you need to get in early and organize, I suppose, overall with regards to this. So potential capacities within this network, if we build a network like this, we've got a lot of different qualities in there. Unfortunately, everyone is very pressed. We don't have huge amounts of money, to form a network at the moment, but we can identify sources of funding. There's policy being generated at an EU level, which can be filtered down to an Irish level, and vice versa. The Irish experience can then be shared. We have functional capacity. We have a lot of people, for instance, who have administrative experience. We have people with communications experience. We have people with legal experience. Within the group, for instance, there's a number of barristers and solicitors who can kind of lend their support with regards to not only kind of forming a network, but also scrutinizing EU legislation. We have institutional development. We share. There's a number of organizations from Trinity College to others that have kind of said, "Yeah, we'll help you incubate this network and kind of build it at a grassroots level." We have networks. At the presentation last Wednesday, we had people from Ireland, we had people from Brussels, and we even have representation from East Africa, who are interested in what's going on. So there's a general interest. And, there's also a lot of political interest and access, both at an Ireland and Brussels level. So not only have a few Irish politicians reached out and said that they're interested, but a few EU level politicians are there, and initial discussions have already been held with MEPs on this core issue. So we're approaching pre-existing networks already. The Green 10 in the past, the Irish Environmental Network, DOCUS, even the IAEA. We've had very kind of initial kind of conversations and to discuss what, is coming out and how can we prepare for the EU presidency. We've identified different funding streams. So, for instance, there's a very interesting initiative by the Department of Foreign Affairs called Communication Europe, which has the opportunity of small amounts of funding for such a network. But there's other, I suppose, areas of discussion as well that we can, or sorry, other areas of funding that we can actually dip into as well, potentially. We just need that institutional capacity to have fundraisers, to have fundraising application experts and to identify the needs and what this is actually going to do. So, and then finally, we've got engagement from youth groups, from older people's groups, from rural activists, from a whole host of different organizations. It's all there. It's all there to be kind of brought into an overall network. But there's obviously a lot of other areas that we're not there. But I suppose within this context, at this early stage, we're only really within the 7th week of discussing this as a network. And already 50 people are interested in taking part directly, and another 50 people are kind of looking from the outside. So it's got a lot of opportunity to grow this overall network into quite an interesting space. And I suppose overall what we're saying to people is it doesn't cost you anything to be a part of it. Think about what little bits of information you can put in, how you could join our WhatsApp groups, contribute towards our web discussions, hold a meeting of your own. If you've got any funding, great, let us know about it. Or if you're hoping to do something around the Irish presidency, just please let us know. We can signpost that activity for you. We can support you in any way that we can, but it's all there to be done. What could this network do then? So obviously, a civil society network, it's really a launch pad of future activities, but it's also there to be providing information and resources to a wider organization. And it's kind of a great break glass in case of an emergency. So you can see here, the hammer and the switch there ready to go. But it's really preparing for that so that when other actors are there and they're ready to moving forward, we're there to supply some information, some capacity, and also kind of this bridge that already exists. So within the kind of overall network, we're really focusing on the next kind of 14 months, I suppose, of kind of capacity development and to make sure that there's a head start so the rest of civil society can take on the baton. We're campaigning, so we're connecting these policy analysts with campaigners, grant writers, green business champions, finance experts, organizers, all into one system. This is one that people can dip into for your own organization, for your own interest. You can listen, you can meet, you can take the bits that you want. We're really focusing on sharing information on the MFF negotiations. This is the core, I suppose, plank of what we're trying to do. We won't try to vary too much into other areas, but there may be some natural discussions that happened. We'll be building alliances between Ireland and Brussels overall, so we'll be having those kind of overall discussions there. We have meetings already planned at a Brussels level that we can invite people to. We're talking to those MEPs. We're talking to a lot of different areas, We're informal. This is the whole beauty of it. There's no legal entity to date, but we can get one if we want one. To date, we've had no costs. It's really just people coming around the table. But that gives us a freedom because we're not representing any organization per se. We're representing ourselves as individuals. And there's nobody can tell us to stop. But we will, of course, keep looking and keep asking. And if any party, whether it be an Irish organization like DOCUS or IEN, ask us, please don't muddy the water. Please don't get involved in certain area. We'll certainly consider it and we'll certainly kind of see that. But there's no limits on what we can actually do as a network, And, moving on then, we're going to keep upselling. We're going to stay agile. A network like this, because we don't have the bureaucracy and we don't have, I suppose, the rules, I suppose, sometimes that kind of bind other people, we can look for small contributions over time. We don't need them right now, but they would help, And we have experience. We have a tremendous amount of experience of people here. The 35 people that attended the meeting on the Wednesday had a whole range of different experiences. They didn't always understand what experience they had, but whether it's time, whether it's support, whether it's, creating that network or analyzing policy, it was all there. It's all there to be tapped into. People are free to meet, introduce, and work with whoever they want. Information provided at this stage, it's all free and free to share. You can pass it on to someone else. We do hope you'll share your own experiences. And that might be slightly altruistic, but it's only based on that kind of principle of partnership that we can really move over. And the other really important thing is this is really early stages. This is an opportunity to really kind of get engaged at an early stage of something that can be kind of interesting. If during these cynical times, we're all looking for something to latch onto that's positive, and this is one positive contribution that we can make. So what the network is not, it's not controlled by any one person, organization, or interest. Yeah, there's more people putting in effort into different areas, more interest, but it's mutually owned by everyone and nobody. It's not a think tank or academic department. We're not trying to outdo what the UCD's, European Affairs Department is doing. We're not the IEA, sorry, as the university department, as we kind of talked about. We're not currently receiving any financial support. We're not trying to replace any other network or coalition. There's no intention to go beyond the Irish EU presidency for the moment. We're really just focused on that as a key goal. And it's not a vehicle for any particular campaign or agenda. It's a launch pad for different opportunities then after. If somebody wants to work on, environmental marine, or if they want to work with a group of other experts with regard to sustainable food, or on, a more humanitarian focus or more sustainable development focus, that's free to do. And it's to look at that network and see what can we actually add. So we have a number of values in the space, and you're free to read over this in your own time, but we really are looking to bring in those diverse perspectives. We really want this to be a safe space. We want it to be a space for information sharing. It's all on voluntary participation. Nobody's been told they have to participate. Freedom to form separate groups. People can have as many splinter groups as they want. And we all know the environmental organizations are quite good at that. But this is a network, so it should really embrace the diversity of views. Some people might view, for instance, this is, some members being humanitarian wash or greenwash. Within a network, I think we can safely say, for instance, the core values are the same, that we want things to be positive overall in terms of environmental funding and the humanitarian funding. Our approaches and our perspectives may differ a little bit, but we should actually at least accept that different people will have different views. And, we keep that. And overall attitude to the EU itself, we don't see ourselves as a forum for discussing whether or not the EU should exist. Ireland should be a member of the EU. We're not having those discussions. It's not a Brexit or Irexit kind of discussion. It's the discussion of this is here where we are now. We're going to be in the EU for the next 10, 15 years. Hopefully, my own perspective is that we stay in the EU, but we want to shape the EU into something that we think can be good for society and for the environment, and I suppose as a global force. So in the areas that we see, for instance, that lacking a little bit, this is an opportunity to have that discussion. These were some of the people that spoke on the day. We had the discussions. It was very much everyone coming with a different perspective. So we had Emer Costa, former MEP, who was there to share her experience in the former MFF, which she helped negotiate, and she discussed some of the social justice elements that she had worked on, especially with regards to access for food and food poverty. We had Carl Richter from WWF, who kind of gave his overview. And Diarmuid McAree, CEO of CRAN, kind of gave the importance of the green economy, especially with regards to green jobs, some of the work that he's doing. Eric Gerritsen has been feeding into this process, and he's an experienced ecologist working on it in EU affairs. Gareth Patrick Kelly, unfortunately, wasn't there on the day due to scheduling problems, but he was there moderating from an outside. He's been contributing from a southeastern European perspective. So he's an Irish environmentalist that's based in Sarajevo, and already he's found synergies and he's found funding that he can potentially access. We've also been getting the view from the south, so we've had people there as well. We have ordinary people like Dagmar Fisher, who's an environmental activist and policy contributor, but she's doing this from her own point of view, and she brings an energy, I suppose, that few other people have. Then we had Niall Kearns, who's been active in the digital space with regards to campaigning. He worked with me in the European Commission as a contractor, and we hatched many opportunities and projects together. And he has not only a space, I suppose, with regards to digital side of things, but also he scrutinizes the EU policy on a digital rights perspective, on an environmental perspective, and brings the insight of not only, over 40 years of activism, but also a very unique way of seeing the world. So we opened it all up to a general discussion at the end, and that discussion is continuing online now. We looked at a very quick SWOT analysis of where we are, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and we identified some of those with regards to the presentation on the day. And then I suppose moving towards the next session, we kind of identified a clear pathway, or we have a clear pathway. So for instance, there's a meeting in Brussels with Green 10 representatives happening in 2 weeks' time. Anyone is free to happen, but that will be reported back. We'll keep building contacts, keep reaching out to new people. So if we got to, have 50 people interested in the work we did, 35 people attend a meeting, and another 100 people who are interested but seeing where it goes, and that's only in the space of 7 weeks, there's potential over the next year and a half to really build that even further. We've bought a website address. We're about to launch that. We'll have that there. We have a hackathon. So what's a hackathon? It's an opportunity for crowdsourcing ideas and breaking up who can work within different areas of this network and developing organizational capacity. So we'll be sitting around a table physically, but also online in April to kind of discuss some of that capacity need and also see where people's true interests are or where they can actually do it. We'll also have a meeting in late April to institutionalize the network. So we'll look at legal entity, we'll look at structures, we'll look at needs, steering committee establishment, and we'll probably look for some formal mass launch end of May as well. So we've had a soft launch. It's trying to get some sort of critical mass together. We're going to keep growing, keep growing the network. So we encourage everyone to join the LinkedIn group, and the link of that will be posted in the future. It's also this whole video and the presentation slides will then be posted as well, and we'll keep refining that. And we'll create a Google Drive of documents as well that people can archive. This presentation as well will be given a number of other times. So we have the slide deck, and we'll keep giving this every 3 or 4 weeks to people, either online or in person, but or even on a bilateral basis. So if people just want to have a small group, 5, 6 people around the table and want to discuss, we're happy to give this presentation. And overall, I suppose you are the network. Come and join us. So we have Sive O'Neill, who's acting as the coordinator for the moment. You have myself, Philippe Carr, who I suppose kind of set up this network. Come and meet with us on LinkedIn. Come to us and share your views. Watch the website as it grows and develops. We have a WhatsApp group, so contact me, Philippe Carr, and I'll add you to the WhatsApp group if you'd like to be a part of that. And you can find out, exactly join that group there as well. So it's all a bit rough and ready at the moment. There's a lot of potential for this group, but if we can grow to potentially 50 to 100 people in the first 6 weeks, why can't we do that? Another 100 people over the 6 weeks after that, another 100 people after that, and those contacts across Ireland and Brussels will keep building. So it's really up to us to see that continue. So please, we'd encourage you to reach out if you have any questions, if you'd like to have a phone call and discuss further what sort of participation you can have, or just really see where we're going with this. We'd love to have you. We'd really love to be there. So it's an open invite. Thank you very much.